From a physique menacing enough to make you instantly sweat to a stare so cold it'll make any man tremble, here's a list of the most intimidating boxers of all time. Let's kick off with the Man Mountain, Nikolai Valuev. With a frame of 7 feet 2, Nikolai was quite the sight in the ring. During his career, he seemed to be built for the purpose of fending off attacks. That is, if anyone had the audacity to try one in the first place. Most of his fights took place with him at 310 pounds or more, so opponents weren't exactly lining up. Valuev took on the world at the start of his career, with fights in Germany, the USA, Russia, Japan, Australia, and more. However, it was his 31st consecutive victory that earned him the title of the champion of his country, Russia. He's even a politician there now. This next boxer might not have had Nikolai's height, but his face was a weapon in itself. It's Bernard Hopkins. Emerging unfazed from the housing projects in Philadelphia, Bernard had a tough childhood, but he discovered his passion for boxing in prison, and the rest is history. After being released in 1988, he came to be known as the Alien. He was confrontational in interviews and absolutely relentless in the ring. Hopkins would use his nickname, the Executioner, and would approach his opponent in the ring with an executioner mask on to psych them out. And that wasn't even the most intimidating part of the routine. The real horror would settle in once he took off that mask. His own face was every bit as frightening. And of course, once you saw it, the punches weren't too far off, and they just went on to reinforce, consult your sensible selves before looking for a fight with the Alien. On top of this, the man was oblivious to time. He still remains the oldest boxer to win a world championship, and he did it not once, not twice, but 3 times, at 46, 48, and 49. Guess keeping people at arm's length because of your scary looks helps you stay in your prime. Moving on, this next fighter was so ferocious, he was one of the most feared fighters on the planet, Sonny Liston. Sonny was a brooding menace in his heyday. Just over 6 feet and thick in build, Liston also stumbled upon boxing while in prison. Right after release, he bagged the Chicago Golden Gloves heavyweight before going pro in 1953. This was followed by a swift rise in his career that had many others in the industry avoiding him. And on September 25, 1962, all their fears were confirmed when Sonny absolutely battered the world champion Floyd Patterson. You may say I'm overselling the intimidation factor here when you look at Sonny, but listen up. He was an ex-con, he was rumored to be the mob's leg breaker, and was an associate of Blinky Palmero and Frankie Carbo. Add all that to his fighting prowess and unflinching poker face, and it's almost like a class in Intimidation 101. Now, this next boxer's all grandpa energy now, but at the height of his career, you would not have caught him smiling. George Foreman. The man behind the George Foreman grills was a sparring partner of none other than Sonny Liston in the 1960s, so you know he learned the tact of terror from the best out there. When later Big George began training with the former boxing legend Archie Moore, he learned the art of using his eyes to subdue his opponent. Moore taught George to never look away from the opponent and to talk intimidatingly in their ear. Couple that with one of the hardest punches in the history of boxing, and you've got a champ sensible folk would totally steer clear of. The man never smiled, didn't talk much, and seemed to stare right through you. And if that's not enough, let's look at his performance. Foreman absolutely destroyed Ken Norton once in the second round. Now, why is this significant? Well, Norton was a great heavyweight boxer who had also managed to beat Muhammad Ali. Imagine that. And Foreman was such a feared figure that when Muhammad Ali was set to fight him, people genuinely feared for Ali's life. Such was the hitting power this boxer possessed that back in the 1980s, it was rumored that Mike Tyson had avoided facing old George.
I wonder what would have happened, not if Foreman fought Tyson in his prime, but if they would have fought then. What would have happened if you would have fought Mike Tyson?
I call him Mike Nightmare Tyson. That guy was a nightmare in the ring. I mean, really.
So far, I've mentioned boxers who'd strike fear in you with just one look.
Continues to whip those punches in, and Victor Loughlin says that's enough. It's not before time. Derek Chisora is beaten by Tyson Fury.
But this next fighter's a different story. Gennady Golovkin. Golovkin is relatively unassuming.
The undefeated Gennady Triple G Golovkin.
If you were to see his beaming smile, he'd probably fool you, but the guy is a smiling assassin. And if you want to know how terrifying Golovkin can be, I'll tell you a little story. About the time Gennady beat Curtis Stevens in November 2013,
Because he's throwing back just enough to stop the ref from stopping it.
Big right cross by Golovkin. Whipping Curtis Stevens into the corner.
Now Stevens had a classic modern boxer build, and Golovkin was kind of skinny and totally not up to par with his opponent physically, and still he managed to knock Curtis silly.
Good right hand by Golovkin. Good left hook by Golovkin. And down goes Stevens. There it is. Cossack Thunder in round number 2. And now Gennady will go for the kill.
And if you go back and watch the fight, you'll see the disbelief in Stevens' eyes and maybe spot a little bit of fear too, because Golovkin's smile peeks out when he's done and dusted with his foe. Also, his vacant and relentless stare really bears on the opponent too. It's no wonder then that he's got the nickname God of War. Speaking of looks that'll humble you, there's also Carlos Monzon. This Argentinian brawler had confidence for miles and a right hand that could be used as a cannon. His reputation of being from the streets added to his general aura of ferociousness. In the squared circle, this man was all about dominating. He practically made his legacy knocking people out and looking fierce doing it. He was considered to be one of the most feared fighters. Mike Tyson himself commented that he loved Carlos. He also added that Carlos never talked much because he didn't need to since the ring belonged to him. And this next boxer was named by Iron Mike as his favorite fighter growing up, Roberto Duran. With an air of ruthlessness and the nickname Hand of Stone, Roberto could unnerve some of the most serious fighters out there. Add on his classic sneer of anger with eyes that could drill holes, and he seemed like a man ready to destroy all in his path. Roberto loved fighting and would always be brutal, sometimes even laughing at his opponents. Joe Frazier, the first man to defeat Muhammad Ali, was asked once if Duran reminded him of someone, and Smokin' Joe replied with, "Yeah, Charles Manson." Manson committed a series of murders, amongst other deplorable things. If that doesn't send chills up your spine, what would? Also, once Roberto's ECG came back irregular before a fight, and his trainer, Ray Arcel, straight up said, "That can't be true, Duran doesn't have a heart." Now, while on the subject of fierce fighters, the last name is someone so next level, if he had his way, he'd fight Achilles, a hero from Greek mythology, Mike Tyson. Yeah, I was mentioning things Tyson had said about some of the fighters like it's an accomplishment, and now you know why. Mike was an absolute terror back when he was at the height of his career. Of course, he's still pretty intimidating, but back then Tyson never held back. He was a troubled youth who trained and grew up to be the baddest man on the planet. He himself explained that many of his opponents would just lose the fight before they even got hit, because Iron Mike would stare them down. And if anyone looked down for even a tenth of a second, Tyson would know he'd managed to break his foe's spirit. Wow! And Tyson served a whole lot of humble pie to those who thought they knew better. And that's a wrap on the most intimidating boxers of all time.